Okay, Alexander, let's do an update as to what's going on in Ukraine. The big story on the ground, of course, is the cauldron, which I believe has officially closed. At least those are the reports that I'm getting. The road out of Lysychansk is now completely closed up, and I have read reports that 6,000. I don't know how true this is. 6,000 troops have surrendered. Let's wait. Let's give it a day or two and see if this is indeed the case. But that is huge news. The next battles are going to probably head towards Bakhmut and then eventually towards Slavyansk. But this is big news because if this is true and this holds, it does mean that Lugansk, for the most part, the oblast of Lugansk is whole, is almost 100% now in Russian territory. That's big news if you consider one of the main objectives of this special military operation was focused on Lugansk and Donetsk. So one of the pieces of the puzzle may be complete very, very soon. You have reports coming out of Reuters that there may be an EU compromise with regards to Kaliningrad. This is coming out of Reuters. This is not confirmed, but Reuters is citing sources close to Brussels elite that the EU is finally getting Lithuania to meet them to meet them towards their opinion that Kaliningrad is not worth it, and to back off and to carve out some sort of special exemption for Kaliningrad with regard to sanctions. And what else is there? That's Putin is giving. He has his first trip abroad. I believe it's at the Caspian conference.
Right. Yeah.
Caspian
In
summit
Ashgabat,
as well.
in Turkmenistan.
Ashgabat. Yeah, we have craziness coming out of Boris Johnson, toxic masculinity, and if Putin was a woman, Putin was answering questions about. Putin actually answered questions about that, and what else? I think that's. Am I missing something as far as what we may want to discuss?
I think you've got the essence of it. Now, I mean, can we just say this? Looming Ukrainian defeat in Lysychansk is it's actually the biggest battle in the war so far. I mean, it's bigger, in my opinion, than Mariupol. Now, Mariupol was a city on the Sea of Azov. It was a bigger place in some respects than the Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, industrial conurbation. But it was, to some extent, I think, isolated from the rest of Donbass. This is in the heart of Donbass. It's a sort of important strategic location, and it was sprawling. It was in some ways much more defendable than Mariupol because you had river systems that complicated advances. It was forested. It was all sorts of towns and settlements that altogether combined to make it, a sort of complex, dense area. And what has happened is that over the last couple of weeks, the Russians have methodically taken it bit by bit. And they've not just taken it bit by bit, but as you rightly said, and I'm getting the same reports that the cauldron, the trap around the Ukrainian troops in Lysychansk, the last remaining troops defending this big urban conurbation, that the last part of this trap has now shut, and that there's thousands of Ukrainian troops trapped. Now, whether there have been mass surrenders, I don't know. But I would say that one is also getting a sense that Ukrainian morale in Lysychansk is on the point of collapse. Troops have apparently been trying to flee through, Russian bombardments back to Ukrainian lines. It's been a hellish battle, and it's ended in a comprehensive Ukrainian defeat. And this very large industrial urban area in northern Donbass is now almost under Russian control. And as you rightly said, that brings the whole of Lugansk region under Russian control. That is a major part of the original objective that the Russians had. And of course, it's important also because capturing this place makes it much easier to start to push southward towards Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, the one remaining big industrial urban concentration in Donbass, which remains under Ukrainian control. And once that falls, the whole of Donetsk region will rapidly come under Russian control, and that will be the end of the Ukrainian presence in Donbass. So this is important, and it's important, as I say, in military terms, because Ukraine has fought incredibly hard to hold on to all of these places, but it's steadily losing them. It's losing them at the cost of enormous losses. And at the same time, whilst all this is happening, it's losing its most important industrial region. And there's something that I hadn't appreciated about Donbass when this war started, but it's been explained by various people, by Andrei Martyanov was one of the people who pointed this out, that this is a highly urbanized area. It's very dense in terms of its cities. The comparison I've been given by somebody who knows the area is with the Ruhr area in Germany, which is an industrial region. You've got lots of factory towns, each of them small in themselves. You talk about 100,000 people, 50,000 people, but the better way to understand it is a one single big, dense belt of towns and cities, all linked up with each other, where one ends, the other starts, and, with lots of factories there, making it in some ways a very defendable place. If you're defending this area, you can build fortifications, you can, hold back your, the people who are advancing, and it's a difficult place to capture if you are sort of advancing into it. Now, once Ukraine loses Donbass, it's lost its major industrial heartland, but it's also lost this very urbanized, dense area, and highly defendable area. Other parts of Ukraine are not like this, and further west and further south, the steppe lands begin, which are much more open, with wide fields and fewer settlements, and that becomes ideal tank country, and that's where you can have much more dynamic, rapid advances if that's what you want to do. So in a way, it's both a major defeat for Ukraine in that it's lost most of its best troops trying to defend this place. It's also a major economic defeat for Ukraine because it's losing its most important industrial hub, and the Severodonetsk-Lysychansk conurbation was a key part of that. And it's also, in a way, the shield of Ukraine, this densely populated, fortified area which Ukraine was able to hold in order to keep Russian mobile armies from advancing deep into the interior. So this is a big battle. It's a key battle, and Ukraine is about to lose it.
All right. So, I think you summed it up really, really well. This is a huge victory for Russia and a terrible defeat for Ukraine. And let's move on now, and let's tackle Kaliningrad. And if you can couple it with Svalbard, which I think is a story that not many people are talking about, but it's very similar to Kaliningrad. Not completely the same, but if you can touch upon those two news stories as well. And if you can finish off the video, Alexander, speaking about Putin's first international trip. This is since the special military operation. That's significant. Putin talked about the special military operation, of course, and he pretty much said everything is going, actually he did say, quote, everything is going according to plan. He said nothing has changed. The goal is to liberate Donbass, to protect these people, and to create conditions that would guarantee the safety for Russia itself. That's it. And he also said, this quote, I'm not talking about deadlines. I never do, because that's life. This is reality. Imposing deadlines is wrong because it is related to the intensity of fighting, and the intensity is directly linked to the possible casualties. And we have to first and foremost think about preserving the lives of our guys. And this ties into another topic, if you can remember, to discuss about this real briefly, which is that Putin on his trip gave the okay for a prisoner swap, 144 for 144 Ukraine POWs with 144 Russian POWs. There's some people in Russia who are upset about this prisoner swap, just because a lot of these prisoners are Azov guys, and so the argument is, I thought this operation was about denazification, and now you're giving these Azov guys back. But my personal opinion is that when you have these prisoner exchanges, you have to agree to them, especially if it's 1-to-1, because you got to get your guys back home. That's my own personal view of things. Anyway, I've given you 4 or 2 topic, depending on how you want to look at it.
Let's start with Svalbard, because this is, as you correctly said, it's not attracted the kind of media attention that it should do. Now, Svalbard is an island. It's a group of islands, but there's one particular island. Now, as a result of very complex negotiations that took place decades ago after the Second World War, Norway has sovereignty over Svalbard, but the Russians, who had a historic claim to Svalbard, were allowed to maintain a large settlement there. And this is a civilian settlement, not a military base or anything like that. They used to, by the way, mine coal in Svalbard. I don't believe that goes on anymore, but it's a civilian settlement, and access to it was guaranteed to the Russians by international treaty. Now, throughout the Cold War, and remember, Norway is a NATO country and was a NATO country throughout the Cold War. Throughout the Cold War, that arrangement held. So you had that strange circumstance that during the Cold War, the Soviets, because we're talking about the Soviets, were able to maintain a large civilian settlement on an island which belonged to a NATO power. But that continued throughout the Cold War. There were no real tensions. It was a very, very controlled, very stable situation. It never became a point of conflict. And in fact, Norway and the Soviet Union actually had reasonably good relations, despite obviously Norway being on the other side, being part of NATO as opposed to a neutral. Well, what has now happened is that in the midst of this confrontation there is with Russia, with all the hysteria and anger that we've now seen, with, who knows, perhaps Jens Stoltenberg, who's Norwegian, the NATO Secretary General, perhaps pulling some strings in Oslo. This very stable situation in Svalbard has now been overturned. And we've seen that the Norwegian authorities are preventing the Russians resupplying the people in Svalbard. And I mean, I understand this isn't weapons. We're not talking about weapons or anything of that kind. We're talking about food, energy supplies, those kind of things. And on the face of it, I have to say, it looks like a straightforward attempt by the Norwegians and by NATO to force these people out of Svalbard. In other words, to eject them, violating all those agreements that were made all those decades ago, and of course violating also the basic accord and stability that existed in this part of the Arctic. And I have to say, it looks to me like another deliberate provocation. It's clearly intended to provoke the Russians into some kind of strong response in the Arctic, which can then be used against Norway, which can then be used in order to try to create some more tensions between Russia and the West, and perhaps escalate the conflict between Russia and the West. And in that, it is exactly the same as Kaliningrad. This attempt to block civilian traffic in civilian goods from Russia proper, if you like, to Kaliningrad, which is also a part of Russia, violating international agreements which had been reached in the 1990s when the Soviet Union broke up, and which allowed Russian road and railway traffic through the Baltic states and Lithuania in particular to Kaliningrad to keep Kaliningrad supplied. The fact that these two things have happened at about the same time, it looks to me like our friends in Washington, the neocons, pulling the strings, trying to create trouble, trying to create another crisis somewhere in Europe, as the situation perhaps in Ukraine isn't going according to plan, trying to goad the Russians into some kind of military action perhaps against Lithuania, which is a NATO country, and this looks like another attempt to goad the Russians into military action against Norway, which is also a NATO country. And the calculation in both cases is that if the Russians don't, well then Kaliningrad becomes blockaded, and the Russians are pushed out of Svalbard, and it's a humiliation for Russia in either case. And of course, Svalbard, it's a small community, it's not of very great strategic importance, but for the Russians, if Kaliningrad becomes blockaded, then it would be a massive, massive defeat. Well, in terms of Kaliningrad, it's not going to happen. The Russians are able to keep it supplied, and that's what they've shown they can do. They can keep it supplied by sea. By the way, Finland and Sweden joining NATO is not going to change that. There's still open sea outside, the maritime borders of Sweden and Finland, which the Russians can still use to transport goods by sea to Kaliningrad, even if Finland and Sweden close their seas to Russian merchant ships, which, by the way, would also be illegal, but that's another story. But anyway, the Russians can still keeps Kaliningrad supplied. More difficult to keep Svalbard supplied. But as you absolutely rightly say, some people in Europe are very unhappy with this. They don't want to see more escalations with Russia. And clearly, there's mounting pressure now from within the EU, on Lithuania especially, to change its position on Kaliningrad. And I suspect the same people will be talking to Norway, and they'll be telling Norway, for heaven's sake, leave this alone. All you're doing is you're creating more tensions with Russia in issues which have been up to now entirely stable and where we don't need them. So that, I think, is probably what's going to happen. This thing is going to be resolved diplomatically, because it's clear that some people in Berlin, in Paris, in Rome, even in Brussels, just don't want another crisis with Russia over these kind of issues, particularly on issues where the Russians are unequivocally in the right. You can argue about Ukraine and about what the Russians have done there, but really you cannot argue over the Kaliningrad, the right of shipment to Kaliningrad, and you cannot argue over the right of shipment to Svalbard, because obstructing both violates the agreements and in some cases the treaties that have previously been made. So I think that probably these things will be resolved diplomatically. If they're not, then I think the Russians have already indicated that they would respond strongly against Lithuania, but through economic pressure. What they will do over Svalbard remains to be seen. So I just wanted to say that about those places.
Yeah, finish off the video, Alexander, with Putin's trip.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
and the
So this
prisoner
is
exchange, by the way, and the prisoner exchange. was
absolutely.
also
Well,
there.
let's actually deal firstly with the prisoner exchange. I think unequivocally here, the Russians got the better of the deal. Now, I appreciate that there were some Azov people as part of this exchange. It's important that, as far as I can understand, these are heavily wounded people. I gather they don't include the top commanders of Azov, despite some claims to the contrary. But the point is, you get your people back. The Russians have got their people back. The Ukrainians were apparently trying to negotiate a much bigger prisoner swap with the Russians. The problem the Ukrainians have is that they have comparatively few Russian prisoners, just a couple of hundred, whereas the Russians now are holding thousands of Ukrainians. So the Russians refusing to expand the prisoner swap, saying that the prisoners must be swapped one for one Ukrainian for one Russian, in effect, is the Russians gaining the advantage. They've been able to get, I suspect, a substantial number of their people back, whereas the Ukrainians have got only a very small number of theirs. So I think this is an unequivocal win to for the Russians. I do appreciate that there are many people in Russia who are very angry about the fact that some of the Azov people have been handed over, but these are apparently heavily wounded. And as I said, from what I understand, they don't include the top leadership that was taken prisoner in Mariupol. I mean, I might be wrong about that, but that's my understanding. So I think on balance, the Russians have definitely done the right thing. They've got their own people back, and this has been, from their point of view, a successful exchange. Now, Putin going to Ashgabat in Turkmenistan is actually extremely important because this was a meeting of the Caspian Sea powers, the most important of which are Russia and Iran, but of course they also include Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, I believe, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan. So these, the stans, some of the former Soviet republics, the Islamic republics now, which became independent after the Soviet Union fell, they all came together in Turkmenistan, and they had this meeting there. And the key point about this meeting is that they've all again agreed, but apparently it's even more formal this time, that no Western shipping, certainly no Western warships are going to be allowed, and no Western bases are going to be allowed in the Caspian Sea. Now that makes the Caspian Sea a Russian lake. Now, it's important to understand that this has strategic significance because the Caspian Sea, which is completely landlocked, or so it seems, is actually connected with the Black Sea by rivers and canals which were built by the Soviet Union. So what the Russians can do is that they can keep reserve naval forces in the Caspian Sea, and if they need, they can transfer them through this canal and river system to the Black Sea. Obviously, we're only talking about small ships, but nowadays with missiles, including hypersonic missiles, these small missile boats can pack a very powerful punch. They can keep the Black Sea reinforced. They can send missile boats into the Caspian Sea via the Volga from the major Russian industrial centers further north. They can reinforce the Caspian Sea, keep those naval forces in reserve, and then redeploy them in the Black Sea. So it has an important military significance from the Russian point of view. It strengthens Russian control over the Black Sea, naval control over the Black Sea, and it also provides an important reserve area for the Russian Navy. And of course, it also means that NATO warships can't operate in the Caspian Sea, where they might conceivably present a challenge to Russia itself, because the Caspian, it pushes deep inside Russia. If you were to get Western warships there, it would be very threatening for Russia. So the Russians have achieved that. They've also forged closer links with Iran. We're going to see an awful lot more trade between Russia and Iran over the next few years. I mean, they're already linking up their financial systems, and that's an important story which we'll debate and discuss in more detail later. And the other thing that they've done is that through these agreements, they're also binding three of the more important stans, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan, closer within the Russian system. So Kazakhstan, there was that attempted coup back last year, which the Russians were able to quell. The current leadership in Kazakhstan seems to be much more aligned with Russia. The Tokayev, who is the president of Kazakhstan, attended SPIEF, where he was the guest of honor alongside Putin. So Kazakhstan is now definitely, I think, slowly edging closer to Russia. Now, Azerbaijan has been on the fence because of the Nagorno-Karabakh issue. But that has been, to some extent, ameliorated because of the outcome of the war. The fact that Azerbaijan, its president, Aliyev, was present at this summit meeting and fully participated, shows that he's also interested in entering into the Russian system. Now remember, Azerbaijan is an important oil and gas producer. The Europeans have been looking to Azerbaijan to some extent to replace oil and gas from Russia. Doesn't look like that's going to happen to anything like the degree that the Europeans hope. It's debatable whether there is in fact enough oil and gas in Azerbaijan to replace Russia, but that's not looking like it's going to happen after all. And the last piece of this particular puzzle is Turkmenistan. Now, Turkmenistan is a very strange place. It became under the rule of, very tough sort of regime, which was actually quite hostile to Russia in the 2000s. And it seemed to be going very much its own way. It refused to participate in the Eurasian Union. It refused to participate in most of the Russian and Chinese-led Eurasian institutions. It looks like that policy is changing as well. Putin was very warmly received there. One gets the sense that Turkmenistan, which is another major natural gas producer, is also looking to integrate itself in the Chinese and Russian system. And it looks likely that at some point it will also join the Eurasian Economic Union and the other institutions that we see, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and all of those, perhaps even eventually the Collective Security Treaty Organization. So we've seen a successful summit from Putin's point of view. He's tightened Russia's grip on the Caspian. I should say Iran, which is a friendly country, also has a military presence on the Caspian, but that's not a problem for Russia at the moment. But Russia has tightened its grip on the Caspian, and it's tightened its grip on Central Asia and on the energy resources in this region, in the Caspian region, and in Central Asia as well. And at the same time as Putin was in Ashgabat attending this summit, he gave this very interesting press conference, which you touched on. And of course, he was at his usual waspish self. Again, it's striking how calm and measured he was in responding to this abuse he endlessly gets from Western leaders. But he said, look, Sweden and Finland joining NATO is no big deal. It's not the same as Ukraine. Ukraine's far more dangerous, far more important. Our military operation in Ukraine is proceeding according to plan. Our objectives in Ukraine have not changed. They're the same ones that we announced at the start of the war, at the start of the special operation. And as you absolutely rightly said, he had a go at Boris Johnson, and indeed Justin Trudeau, made, I thought, some utterly, frankly, crude and stupid comments about, the fact that Putin has been seen, riding a horse topless on one occasion. I mean, that photograph's been reproduced so many times. And of course, Putin made the point, because they were teasing and talking about, all taking off their jackets and things of this kind. And Putin made the point that, if these people did that, I mean, frankly, given how they look, it would be a disgusting appearance. It would be a disgusting look. And he said a few things about the importance of leading a healthy lifestyle, which, frankly, is a point that perhaps Western leaders might want to consider. I mean, you look at the way Boris Johnson looks. I think that was an incredibly stupid thing for him to say. And frankly, I think many Canadians would probably feel the same way about Justin Trudeau, though he doesn't have the bloated look, perhaps, that Johnson does. But the other thing he said, and it was, I think, really quite clever, was that Johnson comes along, engages in this awful thing that we see so much of nowadays, saying Putin wouldn't have started this war if he was a woman. I mean, really weird stuff. So Putin comes along and says, well, Margaret Thatcher, who was Britain's Prime Minister, she conducted this war in the Falklands back in the 1980s, and she was a woman. And of course, he had a jab at Britain, gave him an opportunity to have a jab at Britain. He says this was an imperialist adventure to sustain British imperial delusions. Many people in Britain might take issue with that, but of course, that will play well in Argentina, which is now manoeuvring to join the BRICS. So it actually was a good example of Putin responding, I think, very effectively to something that Johnson said, and also, in a way, saying something which will please his new friends in Buenos Aires. So you see how skillful and how clever he is in handling these things. By the way, the quip he made about Margaret Thatcher has gone almost completely unreported in Britain.
Of course it has.
Yeah.
Of course it has. They never report on what Putin says accurately.
No.
Yeah. It's just what they've been doing for the past 20 years. But all right. Let's leave it there. Very interesting meeting in with regards to the Caspian. I'm just thinking to myself, the Caspian, and if Russia does eventually make a move on Odessa and they get all of the Black Sea with regards to Ukraine, it's a pretty powerful position, isn't it? Caspian,
it's an extremely powerful
Black
position.
Sea.
Yeah. Well, let's just actually do a mind experiment and look things a little forward. Now, I don't expect this to happen, but let's just say that all these Turkish rumbles about leaving NATO actually become true. Some people in Turkey are talking about it. So Turkey's no longer a NATO state. So you have this strategic reserve area, this fallback position in the Caspian Sea. The Black Sea then starts to fulfill the same role that the Caspian Sea does for the Black Sea, except the Black Sea does it for the Mediterranean, for the Eastern Mediterranean. So you can have Russian warships going from the industrialized regions in the interior of Russia through the Volga and the other riverine systems to the Caspian Sea, being held in reserve there, advanced into the Black Sea, and then, of course, Black Sea becoming increasingly a Russian lake. Turkey perhaps is becoming your friend. You can feed them into the Eastern Mediterranean, where you're already building up a major base in Syria, in Akhmimim, which is both a naval base and an air base. Now, I'm not saying anything like this is going to happen. I mean, this is far too far ahead, but you can start to see, a possible, shaping or reshaping of the balance, the military balance in the Eastern Mediterranean, and that would cause NATO very serious problems.
Yeah. Greece, Cyprus. Who else, Alex? Romania, Bulgaria. Take notice. If Russia does go towards Odessa, and things continue to be, kind of tense with Turkey and the collective West, then who knows? Georgia as well. I mean, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely. You have to just look at a map. Just look at a map, and you can start to see that this could be a big game-changing event. Anyway,
Absolutely.
all right, we'll leave it there. TheDuran.locals.com, everybody, and go to the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.